Hey everyone, there's a very good reason why Western cultures and Western societies have, over the course since their inception, come to the realization that it is the individual which represents what freedom or liberty entails. At the end of the day, human beings, with a very, very few exceptions, those who are conjoined twins, but even then, they usually don't share the same brain. So actually, even conjoined twins deserve the respect of individuality and their sovereignty. That is what made the West so much more prosperous and free in comparison to the rest of the world. Historically, groups, tribalism, and collectivism seem to dominate human intellect. But through a lot of trial, error, tribulations, pain, suffering, death, devastation, and destruction, some very keen minds of some very important individuals recognize and acknowledge that if we don't protect the individual from groups or collectives, then there's no pretense. At that point in time, if you can't protect an individual from gangs or large groups, well, then you don't have any semblance of actual freedom or liberty. Because once again, we're all individuals. Sure, we may identify or associate with many groups or tribes or collectives, and as long as that's done voluntary, that's fine. But when you're talking about law, when you're talking about justice, when you're talking about how we treat each other, the morals and the ethics behind all that, then once again, it comes down to the individual. Absent acknowledgement and respect for the individual, well, you go back to basically the state of nature where it's warring factions, gangs, or tribes. And a lot of really good people are sacrificed in those collective endeavors. Remember, folks, everything that we have today, everything that makes our modern lives so fruitful, so comfortable, so meaningful, fulfilling, and prosperous came as a consequence or the direct result of the ideas from the individual mind. There's no such thing as a collective brain. Humans are not the Borg. Now, it does require lots of other people or groups of people to take that idea and make it a reality and bring it to fruition in the real world. But once again, that idea, that concept originated from an individual mind. Like I say, the geniuses, not just of the Enlightenment era, but of modern Western societies, the US in particular, understood and understand today, or at least most of them do, the ones that adhere to the fundamental rights, principles, and liberties enshrined in the Constitution in the US, they understand that without an acknowledgement and adherence to respecting the sovereignty of the individual, well, we're all back into the dark ages once again. And those who represent today that modern leftist, that politically correct identity politics type of culture that seems to be flourishing on the campuses and in many of the large corporations of this country and in big government, well, eventually they're all going to come around to understanding just how important the individual is in a free society. Identity politics and intersectionality has already shown, in particular those on the left side of the political spectrum, although I will say even some on the right, those who have that group or collective mindset, they're all going to come to realize at some point in time that that intersectionality leads to one place, and that's back to the individual. Although I expect, and I've seen already, a lot of people are going to be sacrificed at the altar of collectivism and groupthink or intersectionality along the way. And I'm not the only one that acknowledges that reality. Headline of the National Post, Jonathan Kay, the main victims of progressive cancel culture are progressives themselves. What they truly fear is the symbolic effect of a heretic speaking freely in a space seen as traditionally controlled by dogmatists. It's being reported by Jonathan Kay, January 2nd, 2020. In the many op-ed denunciations of cancel culture that get churned out, of which I suppose this is one, a common theme is that we've all become too quick to take offense, but having spent the last few years interviewing cancel culture victims, from Steve Galloway to Megan Murphy to James Damore, I can attest that the real driver of mob-run silencing campaigns isn't offense. It's a desire to demonstrate power. When a heretic's agonies and eventual confessions play out on a public medium such as Twitter, The spectacle serves to warn other thought criminals. It's all about offering a show of force, pour encourager les autres, as Voltaire once put it. This explains why cancel culture mobs often channel the tribalistic language and imagery of territorial warfare, with activists seeking to prevent the forces of hate penetrating the secular sacred confines of a campus, library, literary festival, public event, or online discussion group. What they truly fear isn't the substantive content of the heretic's message, of which many mob members will be ignorant, but the symbolic effect of a heretic speaking freely in a space seen as traditionally controlled by dogmatists. Mob censorship only works when the mob is feared. Let a single heretic go unpunished, and the mob loses its power. So actually that goes back to even the days of dogmatic religious fundamentalists. Right? Try stepping into a church and saying that I don't believe the rhetoric you espouse or the God that you hold up. Just try that sometime. You see how that plays out, right? It just so happens I am one of those individuals who are willing to speak out or be the heretic. Even so, we free speech types often exaggerate the censorship powers of modern outrage mobs. As Megan McArdle wrote in the Washington Post this week, J.K. Rowling's recent decision to go public with common sense views on gender and biology shows that we've reached a tipping point on cancel culture. South Park and Ricky Gervais have both survived their own heresies. And even Louis C.K. has been able to go on a sold-out public comedy tour amid a torrent of columns and hashtags demanding his cancellation. Yes, there are some recent examples of mainstream figures such as Don Cherry losing their jobs over controversial statements. But for the most part, cancel culture truly suffocates thought and discussion only when it takes root within gated subcultures such as academia, literature, and arts journalism, whose structures permit a small number of ideologically motivated players to monopolize power. By way of example, I could say pretty much anything I want in this column, within reason, and the mobs won't come after me demanding my cancelization by the National Post, because they know they won't succeed. When I worked at a left-wing arts magazine years ago, by contrast, cancel culture trolls were my constant companion, because they believed rightly that targeting a smaller publication operating within an ideological, monolithic, government-subsidized subculture offered them a greater chance of success. Mobbers may be annoying and vicious, but they're not dumb. They usually channel the same ruthless logic as speculators, applying their available assets, tweets, likes, and blogs, so as to achieve the highest expected rate of return. So true, folks. That cancel culture, it only works if people allow it to happen, which is why freedom of association is so important. Don't associate with people, organizations, or groups that are so ideologically driven that they'll cancel anyone for merely uttering words that they disagree with. No, that is exactly and precisely the time you need to either speak up and speak out or walk away. Remaining silent, complacent, or compliant with these kind of dogmatists only emboldens them. Ironically, this means that progressive cancel culture enthusiasts now spend a lot of time attacking each other, since their social and professional affiliations within activist, academic, and artist milieus render them unequally vulnerable to mob pressure. Witness last year's bizarre fight within Canadian recording circles when one group of Indigenous artists boycotted the Indigenous Music Awards because two other Indigenous artists, Ayalik and Kaylee Makaya, had appropriated their particular style of Indigenous music. There also had been a vicious and unsuccessful attempt by second-tier Canadian writers to deplatform Margaret Atwood because she had the temerity to suggest that the University of British Columbia should provide Stephen Galloway with due process. In a particularly jaw-dropping case, a Toronto-based book publisher pulped the original run of a book by Indigenous poet Sharon Webb Campbell because, according to the white publishers, the book was causing pain to other Indigenous people. So once again, now we're getting to the point where, yes, this cancel culture and this identity politics and this intersectionality, once again, all those intersections, they lead to one place, and it's a one-way street, folks. And that one-way street leads to one thing, and that's the individual. And as you're seeing, these collectivists, these intersectionalists, they're now targeting each other. Because that's the thing. Once you start targeting people or heading down that road in such a manner, once again, what do you got left? You're not going to find any human being that's going to meet that level of perfection that these dogmatists or ideologues try to portray or present. Anyways, I'll place a link to this article in the description of the video below, but that's just another reason, another perfect example why I don't fall for the collective mentality or groupthink or play this whole tribalism BS. No, I'm an individual. I acknowledge everyone else as an individual, and I will respect them and treat them as an individual. The identity politics types, predominantly those on the left these days, are going to find this lesson out at some point in time, but not before they take down a lot of their own kind, a lot of the people that they normally would associate or identify with. That's the thing with these purity tests, folks. They always fail miserably. And why is that? Because we're all human beings. We're all fallible. We're all imperfect. And at the end of the day, regardless of rhetoric, we all want to be respected as individuals. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.